Thank you very much, Professor Clafter, for what you had to say to us. And I would now like to ask the Director of the INSS, Major General in Reserve Amos Yadlin, to combine in his greeting both introduction and opening remarks, but also to use this opportunity to give us a review of the state of national defense as he sees it in his own perspective. So Amos, please, the floor is yours. Good evening, Chairman of the Board of Directors, Frank Lowy, and the friends of the board, and distinguished guests from Israel and abroad. Good evening. I would like to start with an apology coming from the leadership, the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Defense. All of them are under curfew in the Knesset because they have these anti-faith decisions that they have to topple, and that is why I now have to replace some of them tonight, and I hope I will be able to do this as well as I can. Before I start, I would like to tell you that there are 5 rules that guide me when I headed the intelligence department, and I think that these are good rules. We'll see them later on tonight. The first rule, never panic. Panic does not help promote anything. The second rule, on the other hand, is never be euphoric in euphoria, because euphoria is not a good state to be in. Remember the time between 67 and 73? Not a good situation to be in. The desirable situation is to be a little bit paranoid, just slightly. That is the sort of state of affairs that leaves you on your toes, because you're not panicked and you're not in euphoria, and you reach the right decisions. The fourth rule, there are no more silver bullets. There is no one thing that we can do that will solve all the problems. When we went into Entebbe, that was 40 years ago, and even the attack in Iran in 81, all of these issues are now more complex and more multifaceted. And since the temple was destroyed, there are no more prophets, and prophecy was given to the young and to the fools. So we are dealing with the future, but we are no prophets. We have to develop the tools to enable us to understand the future, and we need to take the right steps in order to affect the future. The INSS opens its annual conference at a time that I think is very unique. The timing of spring 2003 is prominent because this spring is full of paradoxes and very interesting ones, very interesting contradictions, different colors of risks and opportunities, pessimism and optimism, tensions that seem unsettleable, but that is the challenge, to settle between them. And I would like to point at the opening of this conference to 3 contradictions. The impressive contradiction between Israel, safe, growing, and the environment around the world and in this region that is in turbulence. The incidents that are occurring around the world are one crisis after another, from terrorism in Boston to a nuclear experiment in North Korea, and the tension of the strain on the United States with nuclear, 80,000 casualties in Syria, Egypt, where is it going? And it's definitely going towards its last dollar. Europe is battling with high unemployment. We have a financial crisis around the world, and all of this is shedding a light on our problems and seeing them in perspective. And some say that this pessimist is an optimist with experience, and standing at this podium has experience and is still an optimist. The other contradiction is in the fact that in the last elections in Israel, the major issues of defense in Israel were not voted on in the ballot, and they were hardly even discussed. And my forecast was, it's not a prophecy, but I predict that we are almost certainly going to have to deal over the next 2 years with the same defense and security challenges that we did not talk about during the elections. And the third paradox is the amazing gap between the bleak, pessimistic outlook and predictions that experts and top journalists shared of what would happen in 2012 and what did in fact happen. What did they promise for us in 2012? They said there would be an attack in Iran. All the parameters that the Prime Minister and Minister of Defense had set had been fulfilled. We said that in response we would have thousands, maybe 200,000 missiles directed at Tel Aviv. They told us that the chemical weapons from Syria will quite likely be used, either Assad right before he leaves the pages of history, or the Al-Qaeda warriors that will take over the reserves. And we were promised that the peace agreements with Jordan and Egypt will be annulled. People even said that there would be war with Egypt, which we have not experienced for 40 years, and that all the areas such as the Golan Heights and the Sinai Desert will be filled with terrorists that will continually attack Israel. They told us we would have a political tsunami. They told us that Israel will be boycotted like South Africa. They said that the United States after the elections will take revenge on us, and all of these predictions and forecasts did not come true. So please don't panic. Those are the good news. On the other hand, we must not be euphoric. We must not be in euphoria, because the worst news are that all of these challenges that I have said is that all of these challenges are still ahead of us, and we have not resolved any of these problems. Israel has now gone gone excavating over the last 2 years. It has adopted a passive policy, a policy that does not initiate, it sometimes responds, and that is because the logic was that when the world is in turmoil and when the region is in turmoil, we should let things stabilize, and only then we should take action. So we should remember that this Arab Spring won't take just one season, not even 1 year. It's been with us, and it will stay with us for many years, perhaps for several decades, before it stabilizes. And we don't have the privilege of just sitting there doing nothing. We at the INSS believe that the initiative to shape a better future for Israel and a safer future, that is the right policy. And therefore we have undertaken at the INSS, we have set up teams to deal with these great issues that have largely not been discussed in the elections. How to stop the Iran nuclear program, how to take this peace process before we reach an agreement out of the stagnation it is currently in over the last 5 years. How do we deal with the changes in the Arab world and create opportunities out of the challenges, and how do we redesign the relationship with our largest ally, the United States of America? And our research teams have consisted of senior researchers and young researchers, and we are very proud of the new generation that is growing here. And we also used foreign experts and external experts that have joined us, and we thank them for that. Tomorrow is the main day of the conference, and the teams will present their conclusions and their analyses, and especially their recommendations for policies, because that is the reason why this institute exists. We don't just analyze and we don't just look at history, we also look forward to the future. I will not steal the limelight from the heads of the teams. You will hear all of them tomorrow and their recommendations. And as we've said, Iran has disappeared. It is no longer on the agenda, on Israeli agenda, even though all the conditions determined by the Prime Minister and the Minister of Defense last summer have been met that should have led to an Israeli attack. But because Iran is no longer on the agenda, it doesn't mean that it is no longer in our vicinity. And we have to remind ourselves that Iran is the only potential existential threat to the State of Israel. This is a very problematic combination of an extreme regime that calls for the annihilation of the State of Israel, that can also be accessible, have access to very extreme means of weaponry that can actually help them reach this goal. And tomorrow I will explain to you why within the next 12 months we will be reaching that crossroads that in previous years I said we have not gotten to yet. But even those who said wolf, wolf, at the end the wolf does come, and this crossroads will force the state of Israel to choose whether it lives with a bomb or whether it goes and bombs Iran. And we now have to, I would like to say tonight, because I have faith in the strength of Israel, that the state of Israel should only be seeing two difficult options and must choose between them. And it's not choosing between each and every one of them. We have a lovely day, we have 20 degrees centigrade, but we're not talking about today. This is not the way we're going to measure our options and decide between them. We have to think of the time when Iran will have a nuclear bomb, and we will either have to stop it from being a nuclear superpower. But I don't accept the comparison of us today as if we are the same as we were in the late 30s or 40s. The reason we have the state of Israel is because we don't want to go back to the days of the Holocaust, and this comparison is simply wrong. We will be able to deal with a bomb, and we will also be able to cope if we have to stop the bomb. We'll be able to deal with both scenarios. Israel is strong. It is the strongest military organization in the region. It is also the most stable country in the region. It has a very great deterrence. In 2006, after the Second Lebanon War, there was everyone said that Israel has lost its deterrence. And in 2007, in the Defense and Foreign Affairs Committee, I said that Israel still has deterrence, and it's a very strong deterrence. And I was attacked. Very reasonable newspaper wrote that I don't understand my own environment, and deterrence is only ever measured in hindsight. But in hindsight, if we look back over the last 7 years, our enemies have had very good and big reasons to attack us, and we deterred them and stopped them from doing so. No one has taken any responsibility for attacking the nuclear reactor in Syria, and the fact that Imad Murnia is no longer here. No one has taken responsibility for that, including the bombing of weapons trail between Syria and Lebanon. All of these have been attributed to Israel, but we have not taken any responsibility, and their enemies have done nothing to retaliate, and that means we have deterrence. I still think that if we need to choose in the crossroads between a nuclear Iran or preventing Iran from becoming nuclear, the strategic ramifications of a non-nuclear Iran are less dangerous. I have been asked by 2 prime ministers and 3 ministers of defense, will Iran use a nuclear bomb the day after it has it? I think that no, that they won't. And I'm no prophet, but I think that I'm 95% sure that they won't use it. And I said, 5% chance of a nuclear bomb in Tel Aviv? I'm not going to take that chance. And I think that the danger with a nuclear Iran is not them launching a nuclear missile on Tel Aviv tomorrow morning. The problem is escalation and miscalculation of leaders, a crisis that develops without anyone wanting it. And the years that I've shared with leaders, they know how to make mistakes. Nasrallah has said enough. If I had known what the Israelis would do, I would not have taken those soldiers. And I know that the Prime Minister also perhaps has said some things that were wrong at the time, and he has paid a price for them. The Cuba missile crisis that we have that was 40 years ago just shows us how close the United States was to a nuclear war. These countries that live here in this world and not in the next world have been able to stop this nuclear war, but the distance between them and a nuclear war was very short. And if it were up to Castro, then the nuclear bomb would indeed have taken, a nuclear war would indeed have taken place. And we have to be careful, because in some way the leaders can cause a nuclear war between the United States and the USSR. There were mechanisms to neutralize and to de-escalate the crisis. President Kennedy sent his brother Robert to talk to the Soviet ambassador in Washington. There is no Iranian embassy in Tel Aviv. There is no Israeli embassy in Tehran. There is no red line between the Kremlin and the White House that still exists today. And the nuclear Iran is not just one that launches a bomb at Israel. It is a proliferation of nuclear arms around the world. The NPT will no longer be valid. The next day the Saudis will go to Pakistan and just take a bomb they have already paid for. And then the Egyptians and the Iraqis and the Turks, anyone who views themselves as a regional superpower. And in order to balance this, it's not just bipartisan, it's multifaceted. This will be very difficult to do. And if anyone thinks they can deter or contain Iran, now when they don't have a nuclear bomb, it's difficult to do, and they are going towards the bomb. We'll talk about that tomorrow, and I think that when Iran becomes nuclear, it will be much more difficult. The United States and Israel are now supposedly in the same place. We share all of our intelligence with the Americans. We have quite a wide consensus, and not like we had in 2007 about the intelligence. We share the same basis, and we share the same goals. And President Obama said also that he's also taking a prevention policy rather than containment, which means accepting a nuclear Iran. So supposedly he shares the Israeli Prime Minister's position, but even though the floor is the same and the roof is the same, there is still a great gap between us. And when I speak in English, I talk about 4 T's: threat, trust, trauma, and timing. And let's look at each one. Threat. The threat perception of the United States is much lower than the Israeli one. Israel perceives a threat and is well presented by the Prime Minister, and I don't think that we need to elaborate on that. The perception of threat in the United States is that we have several nuclear states. We have lived with the USSR for many years, and they had missiles pointed at Los Angeles and Chicago and New York. We can live with Iran, and even then Iranian missiles don't reach the United States. So that's why they perceive the threat differently. The trauma is a different trauma. Our trauma is well known. We have the Holocaust as our trauma. And in terms of the Prime Minister, as I've said, Ahmadinejad is just like Hitler, and the Iranians are the new Germans, and we are now about 6 million Jews here in this country, and Hitler wasn't believed either when he wrote in his book Mein Kampf what he was going to do to the Jews, and when the Iranians said they're going to annihilate Israel, it's not only just propaganda. And this is the Israeli trauma. The American trauma is completely different. The Americans are now ending 10 years with 2 wars in the Middle East in Muslim countries. They have paid $1 trillion for these wars. That's $1,000 million. They have paid with the lives of thousands of soldiers, and they have paid with yet another thing that is very significant, with losing the moral and political strength to lead the world. America will not go towards another war. That is a trauma. They will not fight another war against a Muslim country in the Middle East. Another T is the timing. Israel has defined what the trigger is, what the red line is, as the place where the Iranians can lead the way to the war. They can gain and obtain a bomb, and I will tell you that they are already there, whereas the Americans said that the red line is when they actually have the bomb, when they enrich to the point of 90%, or actually have the actual weapon. And it's up to the Iranians how many years there are between these gaps. So we have a time gap between the United States and Israel on this. And the last T is trust, because when Israel at some point loses its military capability to stall Iran, and we're just talking about stalling, nobody can really stop them forever. Any country that has enough resources and will and determination and technological know-how, within 5 years we can already obtain a nuclear bomb. So we're just talking about stalling, but this delay is very important because it may bring about a change in regime in Iran during this stall, and then we'll have a different story. And I think President Obama's visit here was very important. Thankfully, there were no information leaked from his meeting with the Prime Minister, and I think that reaching trust between these two leaders, and I wrote an article about this in the New York Times a year ago, that we should stop talking about a zone of immunity and start talking about a zone of trust that will give more time before we reach this crossroads. Let the diplomacy work, let the sanctions work, let the secret system work that nobody's taken responsibility for, that maybe will do its job. And I think that President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu have become more intimate during this visit. Perhaps they have not reached an agreement. I will talk about Iran more tomorrow, but I would like to talk more a little bit about the peace process.
The tragedy is that we all know what kind of agreement we can reach. We all know what kind of agreement we will reach, but the leadership on both sides is incapable of reaching it. The three concessions are required, three difficult concessions on each side. Israel must recognize two states, which it has actually already done. It has to draw back to the 67 borders while leaving the large settlements in our own hand, and recognize the Arabs' rights for position within Jerusalem. The Palestinians have to agree to security agreements and agree to allowing refugees to return only to the Palestinian state. Both sides are unwilling to make the concessions at this time. The Palestinian strategy, which did not start, we must honestly say, while Prime Minister Netanyahu was in office, they rejected Prime Minister Olmert's offers as well. They work through the international community, through UN declarations. They attempt to convince Israel to give up on their demands through international pressure. They hear that the state of Israel is lost if it does not choose select a solution of two states. So what's the rush? And I think that the state of Israel is not lost. It is strong, and if it initiates the right processes, it can outline its own boundaries by itself without being dependent upon the Palestinians, and we can reach our objective of being a secure, legitimate, democratic country. These are all important. We can never reach 100% security. We cannot reach 100% legitimacy. We can't even define what 100% democracy is, and we will never reach 100% Jewish population. But we must reach a balance, an optimal solution for all four of those factors, and that is what we have to aim for. That is what we have to aim for. The withdrawal from Lebanon in 2000 and the withdrawal from Gaza in 2005 gave us a bad reputation, gave the Palestinians a bad reputation. If anyone is willing to return to those regions, then they should raise their hands. But I don't see any hands being raised. We must investigate our mistakes, as we do in the Air Force. Whenever we take a flight that was not perfect, we want it to be perfect the next time. We want it to be excellent. So let's investigate. Let's investigate the steps we have taken. I will mention three mistakes that we have made, and maybe we'll go into more detail tomorrow. One-sided withdrawal alone. When we work one-sidedly, then we cannot reach we cannot reach a solution. We must reach an agreement. I'm a bit pessimistic. I think that it will be very difficult to reach an agreement. But in order for the withdrawal to be legitimate, Israel must propose an agreement that the world will consider fair and just. After the Palestinians reject the proposal, we will have the legitimacy to return to negotiations as soon as the Palestinians realize that we are not doomed, that we ourselves we've outlined the solution of two states for two nations. The second is that we have opened the corridor for weapons to be sent from Lebanon and Syria into the territories that we withdrew from in Gaza. We have to be sure that Judea and Samaria is not filled with weapons and ammunition from the Arab countries. Another issue is that we have not cared for the citizens, for those who were disengaged from the Gaza Strip, and that is something that we have to correct. The left wing does not approve of this program because they still have the innocent belief that we can reach an agreement with the Palestinians. I say that this is the only possible plan. We can move forward with it. We can improve Israel's strategic position. The fact that there is no terrorism. The state of Israel has won 3 different battles against terrorism, both Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Palestinian and within the Palestine. Since we have been able to overcome the terrorism as by Israeli initiative, we can use this opportunity of no terrorism to reach an agreement, to propose an agreement. I would like to say that if you had asked me a year and a half ago, what can an institute of this kind do? How can you promote its success? How does it actually make a difference? A year and a half ago, I wouldn't have been able to answer that question. But after a year and a half directing the INSS, I believe that the recommendations for policies, our participation in dialogue, in public dialogue, the papers and the conversations and our meetings with the state's leadership has provided many answers to my questions, what exactly we do and how we measure our success. I don't have time to go into detail right now, but if you take one point as an example, I spoke about Iran. When I discussed our recommendations last autumn, they appeared to be completely perpendicular to what the government intended to do, but now all of the recommendations that I proposed last fall were adopted by the government. I can't take all of the credit. I have to leave some of the credit to Obama and Paris, but I think that there is importance to thinking outside of the box, to creative thinking, and presenting the ideas professionally and in an organized fashion. From my perspective, my greatest moment of satisfaction was that 10 minutes after we published a paper about a certain topic, I received a phone call from a friend who is the head of an intelligence organization in the largest country in the world, and he said, Amos, I wrote what the INSS wrote, and it's amazing, and it's all true. And I want to thank all of the guests who have arrived here tonight, all of those who have presented and spoken, and all of those who will speak throughout the conference. All of the presentations are based on the research that we have done over the past year. I would like to thank Mayor Elran, who has organized this conference, was involved in all of the content. Thank you, Arlie and Deborah, who are so dedicated and made sure that everyone who was supposed to come arrived. And thank you to Kobe, who made this and makes everything that happens in this building possible. So have a good evening and good luck to us all.